Okay, thank you so much. Yes. Okay, so now we are going to have a screening of a film called The Climate Blueprint from Dominica. Now, the director is here with us. Her name is Dr. Emily Wilkinson, and she is a senior research fellow. And I believe we're going to screen it now, and we'll have a moment for a Q&A once it's over. Okay, enjoy.
I come to you straight from the front line of the war on climate change. With physical and emotional difficulty, I have left my bleeding nation to be with you here today because these are the moments for which the United Nations exists. We as a country and as a region did not start this war against nature. We did not provoke it. The war has come to us. We are in shock, but we will rise because Dominican people are strong, because Caribbean people are resilient.
Maria is the worst I've ever seen. It's something not to forget. We were in town that morning, and then we heard there was this storm coming in. Everybody went shopping and make sure we have drinking water, enough food to sustain that hurricane. Making sure we have everything inside, put in our animals and make sure everything is stable. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, the hurricane arrived in our area. We heard a whistling sound. I was in my basement and I was hearing like trees falling, the houses were all flying away. Like there was this do-do-do-do, the ground, it shook like an earthquake. Next morning, my God, no houses. All the houses were gone. At one point in time, I said to myself, what are we going to do?
When a hurricane hits a country like Dominica, it affects the entire country. How does a country like Dominica recover from that? And how does a country like Dominica respond? There's no blueprint that we could pick up and follow for a resilient nation. So we had to create for ourselves our vision of resiliency. This is us trying to come to a solution for ourselves and looked at what are the key areas that we need to be focusing on. Building strong communities, a robust economy, a well-planned and durable infrastructure, collective consciousness, sustainably leveraged natural resources, and institutionalizing resilience. When the vision was expressed to make us a climate resilient country, I think there was a buy-in by the whole population with, yes, we need to be doing this.
Dominica set out to become the world's first climate resilient nation. That is incredibly ambitious, but the ambition is important. It sets a goal. It's an example of a country that's fighting back. Dominica is not unique in trying to formulate a plan and implement a plan to address these issues. All small island developing states around the world are taking this seriously because they have to. Dominica may be further along in really articulating the vision and setting really clear targets and developing indicators to measure progress on the things that the country's committed to doing. The whole world is going to have to do this. The sense of small islands as being the canary in the coal mine, they're the first to experience what everybody else is going to have to deal with. None of this can happen overnight. There is no silver bullet. There's no quick fix to dealing with climate change in the tropics. But they're definitely moving in the right direction.
We are the niche island in the Caribbean. We have lots of rivers, mountains, valleys.
Dominica is beautiful, Dominica is good.
It's a word to describe it.
Dominican people, they're hardworking.
We help each other, we go the extra mile.
The people are involved in their community.
Everybody in Dominica is friendly.
Very loving people.
The people are resilient. We're able to bounce back quickly.
About 500 years ago, we the Kalinago people lived in the entire Caribbean. All that changed when Columbus came into the Caribbean.
With colonization, things changed completely, particularly when the British took over Dominica. Sugar was a big product of the day. Every European power wanted a sugar island. Britain had got this one, and so it was surveyed and subdivided for sugar. After emancipation, enslaved people who had formerly lived on the plantations were told basically that if you don't continue to work for us, you've got to get off. So what happened in the East was that along the plantation boundaries, you found rugged land that the plantation didn't need. And so the people who had previously been living on the plantations then moved to these rugged areas. So you have villages which are seriously affected today because they are sitting on areas which are very volatile when it comes to rainstorms.
Without being deterministic about history, you can trace all of these things back to decisions and actions that happened a very long time ago. During the colonial period, the assumption was that it would be the local plantation owners that would invest in infrastructure, and they didn't.
An important part of the work that CREED has been doing is looking at how we can institutionalize resilience, ensuring that government's agenda is fully aligned with the climate resilience plan so that you have a country that can better weather climate-related disasters and other disasters and be able to bounce back or bounce forward much better.
That kind of mainstreaming resilience across governments was really a critical component of what CREED was set up to do, to really get the sort of resilience thinking and awareness of climate change and hazards into the psyche of the people and of the government. And they're going to need to make sure that everything they do is measured and link it back to projects, that there's really understanding of resilience, what it means, how to measure progress on it, and supporting government as well in understanding better what they're doing to contribute to the resilience goal of the country. It can't be just like one agency or one government department or one initiative that addresses all of that, because it's about everything. It's about agriculture, it's about housing, it's about roads, and in Dominica, critically, bridges, where things are located in relation to slopes, in relation to rivers, in relation to the sea. It's about education and people growing up understanding that and wanting to kind of participate in this kind of transformational vision. You can see that it really involves sort of everybody. The Climate Resilience and Recovery Plan, there's 20 targets that Dominica wants to achieve by 2030. One of the most critical ones refers to the ability of communities to be self-reliant after an extreme weather event. The target is for 14 days. So if you think about what that implies and what's needed in a community for it to be able to self-subsist for 14 days after a hurricane, that's quite a number of things. How can government and businesses and through supply chains, how can we ensure that communities are set up to deal with these things on their own?
We did trainings with the Office of Disaster Management. We have teams that we call CERT. So it's Community Emergency Response Team.
We do simulations in case that happens, how we're going to respond. It's about letting people take ownership of where they are and teach people to trust each other and to trust the process.
A strong community is the backbone of resilience. And if your communities are strong and are prepared, then you can recover much more quickly.
Cooperative action is very relevant because a disaster happens, you're cut off from the rest of the island. It usually is extremely difficult for government services to reach you. There's a lot of cooperation. So much so that there's a type of cooperation called coup de main in the Creole, which means a helping hand.
After Maria, there is this one community called Dominica. 4 days after the hurricane, all of these individuals within that community were back in their homes because they were carpenters, they were plumbers, they were electricians that help. Anything that has to be done, we would reach out to each other.
When the French settlers arrived, they transformed the indigenous houses into more European-style oblong houses with roofs and windows and all that kind of stuff. But they maintained some of the qualities of the indigenous. And they were extremely resilient to hurricanes. Not only was it a matter of the design of the house, but also the placement of the house. A number of them have been there for 200 and something, 250 years, and they've withstood hurricanes for that length of time. But then in the 1950s, we sacrificed all of that. There was this fixation about copying the United States. We brought in a whole set of imported stuff, prefabricated glass windows. There were never glass windows before. You need houses that are well ventilated, that adapt to the northeast trade winds that constantly come from the east, and yet at the same time, within a short period of time, I'm talking about minutes, can be shut up and be secure. This is the classic Dominica tikai. You have got a bonnet roof, or what they call a half hip. Across there, you peg it all in. It holds that end of the roof together. It prevents the roof from being ripped off. A flat roof takes off more quickly and easily than if you have a steeper roof which is well braced and framed, you know. So all of these elements are important when you're considering resilience.
Climate change is real. We're experiencing it every year. We have been exposed to some element, whether it's intense rainfall, hurricanes, flooding, drought. You cannot keep going back to ground zero, starting all over every time a storm like Maria or Erica happens. We have seen intense rain in short period with a lot of water. The soil that we have can absorb a lot of that water, and that can itself cause a lot of land slippage.
Our number one plan to try to stop it would be to control the underlying water that you don't see. Like make provision that when it rains, that it would follow a system of drains. Water catchment would lead straight towards the sea, so it doesn't affect any of the soil around it. The other option would be to implement our vector systems where we use for soil stabilization.
So if you notice on this plot of land, the farmer has a step drain that will reduce the speed at which the water will run off the slope, as well as there are some contour drains to cut back on the water that will be going down the slope. So there are so many things that you would put in place, and that's to do with the intense rain. We have to go back to what we used to do before, because in the past, farmers used green solutions as part of their sustainable practice on their farm.
We're brilliant minds, and we have some good people, behind these said projects. So I believe if we put our mind to it and, we actually challenge it back.
It's about having a strong economy and high-end exports. They produce bay oil and other essential oils which can sell for higher prices. So you've got to get organised and kind of invest in that agro-processing. It's not just about diversification, it's about specialisation.
We all get together, we can create more honey,
That is a great quote.
Dominica is a volcanic country. We have significant geothermal resources, and this is an area that we are pursuing for development because we think that this can spur our green industrialization. We believe that we have sufficient resources that would allow us to be able to build a plant that can provide green hydrogen that can be made available for export to other countries. And of course, there are spin-off businesses that can come as utilizing the byproducts. That creates a huge opportunity for our people to transform our economy.
When we speak of resilience, we speak of the shared knowledge we gather from our elders, and we young people have to do things so that the children of us will benefit from it.
People think about strong walls and strong houses, but strong people, strong children, strong homes, all of that matter. So resilience is let every day be better than the day before, because something yesterday made you stronger for today. Learning through your tribulations so that you might be a strength to somebody who might go through something similar. And if you could make it, I can make it too. So walk with me for a little while. That's it, not just for yourself, but for others.
What I do remember is the beauty of the reefs. In the 50s, we adopted the banana industry. All the banana fields had to be sprayed. That was a massive amount of chemical poison that was poured into the island. That all then flowed down onto these reefs. And now the reefs are dead. That caused a serious issue because then the reefs were not able to protect an island coast against the storm surge. When you go down to the southern end of the island, in the area where there's a Soufriere Marine Reserve, that did not have the banana industry. And the reefs down there are pretty healthy.
Here at Nature Island Diving, we've sort of changed our business model a little bit, where our dive masters are actually utilizing that time that we have during dives with tourists to actually do a conservation project. A lot of these zones that we have set up here, these are all standard parts of the Soufriere-Scottshead Marine Reserve. This is an area where we'd like to do an underwater statue park, also put a wreck and put more parking. The sort of idea is make Champagne an even bigger attraction area where people would have lots of different activities to do. What we've been doing is sort of cutting edge, especially where you're getting tourism to work with conservation. My hope for the future, it's not very grandiose. It's not trying to save the world, change anything massive like that. It's just, I hope that Soufriere-Scottshead Galleon can reach the full potential that I believe this community has.
Dominica has not sat back and said, you know, we're vulnerable, we're a victim. We have developed a solution for ourselves. If Dominica can show that it is a good example for others to follow so that all of us can become more resilient, all of us can reduce the impact of these disasters on our countries. There are opportunities available for the world to participate in the transformational vision of a small country seeking to become a climate resilient country. And one is in relation to the accessibility of climate finance. It's very difficult for small states to access because the procedures that are in place are quite onerous and take a lot of time.
All of the targets have all been generated here in Dominica. It wasn't written by external consultants. So for donors and for development partners, this should be seen as an opportunity, somewhere where they can support that vision because it already exists. It's really a partnership. This is not a question of charity. There is a real moral and economic imperative. All of the benefits that the UK reaped from industrializing, developing, extracting natural resources from countries like Dominica have in some way contributed to climate change. There's a kind of double responsibility for helping to support Dominica in its resilience journey. These are questions of climate justice. The message is we're already doing a lot, and people are investing their own resources in building resilience. And that needs to be supported. There's enough kind of collective knowledge of what needs to be done to get on with it.
The time has come for the international community to make a stand and to decide whether it will be shoulder to shoulder with those suffering the ravages of climate change worldwide, or whether the international community will merely show some pity now and then flee, relieved to know that this time it was not you. Above all else, Mr. President and members of this august body, we need you. We need your humanity, and we need you now to act truly as our United Nations.
This was incredible, and I'd like to invite Dr. Emily Wilkinson to the stage. If anyone from the audience has any questions, I suggest you do so now. Dr. Emily?
Thank you, everyone. My name is Sarah Howard. I am the director and co-producer of Climate Blueprint Dominica. And you may recognize these two amazing women sitting next to me from the film. We're lucky enough to have Dr. Emily Wilkinson and Francine Barron from Creed to talk more about what we saw in the film and to update all of you with what has happened since we released it. So to that end, I wanted to start off, Emily, with looking at the Loss and Damage Fund. So at COP, we kicked off with a big announcement there, and I wanted to hear you speak more to what that means for access to climate finance and sort of what's on the agenda for negotiations around the Loss and Damage Fund. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, so in response to that question, I mean, it's good and bad news. Certainly, having a fund that is dedicated to addressing some of these impacts that Dominica and other small island developing states experience quite frequently is a good thing. There's a shortage of finance in the aftermath of disasters that comes in kind of quickly, that's needed to not only recover from these events, but to build back and build forward better, and to implement this kind of a holistic resilience plan. And SIDS, small islands, are having real difficulties accessing sufficient climate finance to build resilience, to adapt to climate change. There are all kinds of problems with the existing climate funds, and makes it very, very difficult for small countries with small bureaucracies and small economies and sort of lack of economies of scale to be able to access these funds and implement them to address their climate needs. And so having sort of additional finance that could be readily available would be a good thing if it's easy to access that finance. And I think there's a big question mark over that. With the Loss and Damage Fund being managed by the World Bank, there isn't a precedent for that, for the World Bank having a fund that countries can access directly and easily. So that's going to be the sort of discussion ahead. How can that be made more agile and more useful for countries for these extreme weather events, but also for the kind of slow onset impacts of climate change? We did a bit of research recently looking at the climate attributable loss and damage due to extreme weather events, and it's extremely high. Actually, 38% of losses from floods and cyclones in SIDS over the last 23 years, 38% can be directly attributed to climate change. That's probably a higher figure than most people would expect. And that's really significant. In Dominica, actually, it's really high. And we can see that over that period, about 9.3% of GDP is lost due to climate attributable events. That's the highest of all SIDS. So that's on average per year over the last 22 years. So you can see how that has a really significant impact on the country's ability to invest in resilience and sustainable development and deliver basic services and all the other things that that Dominica would want to be able to do. So finance is a big topic. Loss and damage funds and finance in particular are going to be extremely important.
Thanks, Emily. That's helpful context because I think it's important to celebrate these wins, but also recognize so much more work ahead, lots more to do. Francine, can you tell us more about the CERRP and sort of what have been the updates since we released the film in terms of building on this resilience and recovery plan and what Dominica is leading on in terms of what that looks like?
Thank you, and good afternoon to all of you. Just to perhaps lead off on what Emily was speaking about in relation to the importance of finance and the significance of the Loss and Damage Fund. Hurricane Maria would have destroyed the equivalent of 226% of our GDP. So that is a significant shock occurring within a very short space of time, and this would have affected all critical services. We would have had a virtual cease in having a number of businesses were affected. We would have had everything ground to a halt, really, economic activity ground to a halt immediately after the storm. So the vision that was expressed by our Prime Minister was to rebuild Dominica as a climate resilient country, and we have targeted building that resilience and achieving that goal to 2030. And so we approached it in a coordinated manner. We developed a climate resilience recovery plan that focused on our 6 result areas. And we have set right now the foundation for what a climate resilient Dominica would look like, to ensure that we institutionalize resilience. We worked with all of the ministries of government to ensure that all strategic plans and policies are properly aligned with our resilience agenda. And we have developed resilience indicators for our 20 targets that we want to achieve. The idea being that all ministries of government and private sector as well are working towards the achievement of those resilience targets. And we are collecting the baseline data now to see where we are in relation to those resilience targets and to be able to monitor it over time so that we can see how we're progressing towards achieving those resilience targets to 2030. We have also been involved in a number of different initiatives under the 6 result areas. And the geothermal was mentioned. This is one of the areas that we think are critical to Dominica's economic diversification and building Dominica's economic resilience. And we believe that in developing our geothermal at industrial scale will be a game changer for Dominica in that it will provide jobs for every Dominican who's willing or interested in working, but also provide important foreign exchange in the products that we can export, whether it's green hydrogen, green ammonia, and green fuels, amongst other things. And we think that's important because we need to raise our own financing as well to be able to respond to some of the challenges of climate change. We have found that despite pledges that have been made and despite funds that have been created to support countries in responding to climate change, the ability to access those fundings for small states is extremely difficult. And if you look at how much or what percentage of this funding that's available has actually been accessed by SIDS, we'll see it's a very small percentage. And so we want to ensure that we can create solutions for ourselves as well, that we can stimulate and generate our own funding. But also it's important because of the magnitude of what we want to achieve, it is also necessary to have external support as well, because we're looking at making a country climate resilient, which means that you have to look at how do you make your infrastructure more resilient. And so in approaching that, we have had to change our regulations and policies in relation to how we build to ensure that we can build much more strongly. In relation to how we build our roads and where we build our roads, we have had to take deliberate decisions to strengthen the infrastructure, which means that we, in certain instances, and you would have seen from the film that Dominica has a lot of rivers and waterways and so on, which means that when you have intense rain, even outside of hurricanes, just intense rain in a short space of time, you have significant flooding. You can have land slippage as well. So in building our roads, we have to have more culverts to take the water away. We have to have slope stabilization efforts. We have to have retaining walls done as well. When we build our bridges, we have to build them higher so that there's clear water flow underneath them so they're not washed away by flooding. We have to build them longer and ensure that they're built differently so that they're not easily washed away. And of course, we have to build our buildings stronger as well. In some instances, we've had to actually relocate communities for the reasons that were advanced in the film. In some instances, communities are built in very vulnerable areas, and it actually makes more sense to move persons away from those communities into areas that are much more safe. All of these come at a very significant cost. But what we do understand is that if we want to become resilient, if we want to ensure that we minimize the damage that we suffer as a result of extreme weather events, then we need to take those tough decisions. But those tough decisions come at a price that requires us to have external support to do it. And I've spoken about the impact of hurricanes, but we also have to deal with the impacts of drought, for example. We've had maybe the hottest summer on record for Dominica this year. And that had an impact. For example, we have hydroelectricity, which is a run-of-the-river type of model. We get it from our freshwater lake. However, because it has been so dry and so hot, the demand for electricity went up. The water level of the lake went down, which affected our hydro, which affected the ability of our utility company to provide electricity. So we had to undergo some load shedding. So there are a number of different impacts that one has to prepare for. It has affected our farmers. The extreme heat affected our farmers, so it affected their vegetable production. So there are a number of different impacts that climate change has. Of course, for us, hurricanes are more impactful because they're more damaging in a very short space of time, so there's no ability to adjust. So this is why there's a great imperative for us to build that kind of resilience for Dominica. And this is the journey that we are on, and we continue to work towards.
Thanks, Francine. Emily, I'm wondering if you can speak to a little bit of the unique approach that Dominica has taken in terms of responding to Maria, which would have been just a disaster relief, but thinking about it in terms of how do we build for resilience, which is a different mindset for doing that rebuilding. And then also just the idea of taking a whole of government integrated approach versus setting up a separate agency that does resilience and adaptation. So curious if you can speak to those sort of mindset shifts that I think are unique to this approach and why that may be important for other people to model after.
Yeah, so on the first question, I think one of the kind of critical differences when you think about sort of building resilience after an extreme event like Maria as opposed to just responding, recovering, is to think about how can the country be better able to weather those kind of events in the future. So how to build a sort of stronger socioeconomic system so that any kind of shock has less of an impact. That's one aspect of it. So in the video, there's sort of mention in there, not just sort of diversifying sources of revenue so that if one part of the economy gets affected, not all of it does, but you also need to have the sort of specialization to be able to generate income so that you have the savings to be able to deal with those kinds of different kinds of shocks, not just related to weather and climate change. So that's one aspect. The other is thinking about actually sort of minimizing the impacts, so how to be better prepared, how to have more resilient infrastructure. One of the targets of the 20 targets is for 90% of housing to be to meet resilience standards, which is quite significant if you think about it. I mean, there was an opportunity in the sense that a lot of the housing was damaged or destroyed, so there was an opportunity there to rebuild in a way that would be strong, so houses would be stronger and more resistant to high wind speeds and flooding. But that's quite a a high bar to reach. There'd be very few countries that could say that 90% of housing was resilient to extreme weather. So that's the second component. And then the third component of the sort of the sort of conceptual framework, if you like, thinking about resilience, is to be able to recover faster. So acknowledging that there will be other events, there will be more extreme events in the future, how to make sure that people and communities and the economy can recover quickly so that there aren't then indirect and further impacts as a result of that shock. So those are the sort of three aspects, and those were developed by Dominica. They're articulated in the Climate Resilient Recovery Plan, and really capture quite well the sort of the thinking of what it means to kind of build a resilient country. So that's sort of how I think Dominica's kind of conceptualizing this. And then the other question you had was about the sort of all of society approach. I mean, I've seen that emerge really over time. It doesn't happen overnight, certainly. The anecdote I'll give you is when I started working with CREED in 2019, went to visit Dominica, and this is just over a year after Hurricane Maria. I'd get in a taxi at the airport, and the taxi driver would say, "Oh, have you been to Dominica before? And what are you doing here?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm working with CREED." No one had heard of CREED, and you could walk around and talk about CREED, and nobody knew what the Climate Resilience Agency was, or just didn't know anything about it. 4 years later, when I go to Dominica, get in a taxi at the airport to go into Rosa, the capital, I'm working for CREED. Oh, CREED, everybody's heard of CREED. Everybody knows the excellent work that the Climate Resilience Execution Agency for Dominica is doing. And everyone can name an initiative or something that's happening in the country that is related to this resilience journey. So people feel involved in one way or another. And that's thanks to this vision of resilience, which is really holistic, like they really are putting that into practice. So, a long way to go. Is by no means there, but it's really encouraging to see that kind of the desire to really involve everybody in this vision and sort of make everyone part of the journey.
Thanks for that. I do think it is unique and important to note that, a big part of that is collective consciousness and being engaged in this work on every level. And that is a short timeline to see that kind of change. So thanks for illustrating that. We have a few more minutes to open up to Q&A, so I wanted to give that opportunity to you all to ask some questions. We've got one right here, which I don't think there's a mic, so, or maybe there is. We can take one. Do you want one of these?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Claire Nelson, Dr. Claire Nelson. I represent the Caribbean diaspora. And I'm just curious as to how Dominica is including the diaspora, because when I speak to diaspora people, there doesn't seem to be a lot of connections with the whole climate resilience community. When we have asked Dominica, well, there doesn't seem to be a presence in Washington, D.C., that's for sure. We have tried to get them to attend events that we put on in Washington to advocate for support. So certainly there seems to be an absence of Dominica in terms of diaspora. Given that they are the social safety net to a large extent, what are your plans for including the Dominican diaspora?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And yes, the Dominican diaspora has been a very important part of the response and recovery in the immediate aftermath of disasters. And there is definitely scope to involve the diaspora more in our efforts for building climate resilience overall. There has been some engagement from the diaspora, particularly in relation to our interest in developing our geothermal potential. But we also would like to see more involvement by our diaspora in Dominica's development generally. And we believe that it's necessary for us as a small country with limited personnel to have more of our diaspora come home and participate in Dominica's development and in our goal to build that greater resilience. And so part of what we will be doing is to provide more information to the Dominican diaspora so they are aware of what is taking place and how they can fit in. We normally have an engagement with people from the diaspora who come home during the independence period, and government takes that opportunity to update them on what is happening in Dominica and what are the opportunities for them to engage in what is happening. And so we will continue that engagement and ensure that they know how it is that they can contribute as well to our greater resiliency. So thank you very much for that question.
Hi, good day. Sarah, I would really like to say thank you for doing that video. And interestingly, I did not know about this until I was flying here. The person sitting next to me said, oh, there's this video on Dominica. And I said, please send it to me. So I had to come to this session because I do feel the science is already there. What we're missing is the communications. Climate change right now is a communications issue. And I would like to say, my name is Nisha Manikchan. I'm from the University of the West Indies. So we would love if you can work with us to do more videos. We need funding. So there are a couple of things I want to mention, because at the time when Hurricane Maria hit in 2017, I was working with the development agency, and we were already working with Dominica on a climate change resilience project. And some of the lessons that I learned were, I felt at that impact, people and locals should have been taking images, taking videos of their experience and their trauma. But as somebody who has experienced a car flooded in Trinidad and an apartment flooded in Barbados, at that point in time, you're just thinking about survival. So I think what we need to do is kind of train people now in the Caribbean. Listen, when something happens and you have that impact of flooding and landslide, please capture it on photos and videos. And then, we are kind of at a war with the developed world, and our weapon, we can use social media, and we do need to engender that with the next generation, Gen Z, because they already have those tools. So, there were lessons learned from Dominica, and a lot of them aren't even shown here. For example, for me, at the point in time I was living in Barbados, after what happened in Dominica, I literally bought an inflatable raft and said, if something happens to Barbados, I want to float back home. I do not want to be here because of suffering. And especially with the roofs, you spoke about the roofs. When I went back home to Trinidad, I bought hurricane straps. I'm yet to install it, but I bought them. And you saw that with a lot of people. And the other thing was, when it came to construction, you had to depend a lot on the men, and therefore the cost of construction went up in labor. And as a female, I said, well, I want to be able to be resilient. So I literally went and did a woodworking course, and I bought tools so that I could be resilient. And these are some of the little things we need to show, especially for the next generation and for women. And we could talk more about it, but I do want to add that extra layer when it comes to finance, because you did demonstrate the vetiver grass, and this is something I'm trying to explain to people in Trinidad. Yes, okay, fine, you buy your vetiver, but I think we need to spell out how much did it cost you. So one plant, $2 US, and what area did you have to plant, and how much did that cost you? And we need to start putting figures to those videos and photos. I could speak more at length, but I'm just going to stop there. Thank you.
We'll get to the questions, but just thank you for that. And I totally agree in terms of communication and really tangible things that people can do. I think it's one of the things that attracted me to this story was it is also very tangible, the measurable targets. There's very clear things you can do, but we can get much more micro even in those communications. So thank you for that. More questions?
Yeah, good afternoon. Lisa Hurlston from the Cayman Islands Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency. So one of those entities that has resiliency squarely in its mandate and trying to embed resiliency throughout the rest of the government. So the exact opposite to what you all have achieved. So congratulations on a beautiful production, a lovely film. I've been following CREED for a number of years now, in what you've been doing, Ms. Barron, and in particular interested in the indicators that you have developed from your 2030 plan and the resiliency scorecard that I believe you had allowance produced for you with the dashboard in order to prioritize your climate action and to have it leverage you for financing and funding on an international level. I'm wondering, is it out of the pilot phase now, and is it actively assisting you in getting that attention and that funding for those priority projects?
Thank you very much for that question. It's not out of the pilot phase as yet. We're still gathering the data to establish the baseline for the resilience indicators. And once that process is complete, then we can move to the next stage. So we're still working on it. There has been some delay in that. You probably have that experience as well in terms of data collection. That is one of the perennial challenges that we have in the Caribbean, but we're seeking to ensure that we get all of that baseline data in place and also have a proper system in place to continue to provide the data and monitor and track. Thanks.
Hi there, I'm Niall from Water Offsets. I'm from the UK, and fantastic film, really, really excellent, and great to see all the amazing work that's going on. We've been doing a lot of work, and we've actually started talking to the Cayman Islands as well, where we're looking at what we've been doing in the UK is we've developed the first water neutral settlements. So these are settlements that have no impact on water resources in their region. And what a lot of people don't realise is the UK, we also have some pretty big challenges. So some regions have actually completely run out of water now in the UK, and you can no longer build because there's just not enough water within the system. So we've developed some solutions to that. But also what we're seeing now is a change in policy. And this policy has real particular interest and applicability to a lot of developing nations, because what we're doing is we're seeing this sort of neutrality legislation coming in, which we're sort of helping advise on. And what that means is every new development or new investment has to provide neutrality within the system. So what it means is that is leveraging private funds to facilitate the retrofit and mitigation measures of existing developments as well. So we're doing a lot of work on sort of advising on that now. But also we have a lot of new technologies that we're trying to find ways to facilitate bringing to these nations as well. And a lot of these represent significant cost, energy savings, water savings, all of these things, which alleviates a significant amount of stress. So we'd be really interested to talk with you guys about how we can help facilitate that process, what funding models we can look at to bring the technology through, because what we're trying to explore now is methods where perhaps instead of upfront investment, it's recovered through cost saving or something like that, to try and facilitate that change and a much more affordable option for cities and developing nations. And it's especially applicable in more remote regions. To just give one very small example, you know, in the UK we've changed water consumption within properties from about 160 litres a day to 60, 65. So we've massively reduced water consumption, which has got massive knock-on effects for pumping and movement of water, sanitation, everything else. So I'd be really keen to chat with you guys if you have a moment.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, and would definitely be interested in having a conversation with you in respect of that. Traditionally, because Dominica has, we say 365 rivers, we have not paid enough attention to water conservation. But it's becoming increasingly important now for us to do so, because we're seeing that the water levels are going down. So we would certainly like to have a conversation with you and see whether the solutions that you've developed make sense for us to conserve what we already have. Thank you.
Hi, fantastic film. Congratulations on some of the solutions which are being highlighted in the film. I suppose my question is a follow-up to the gentleman there. I wanted to know the level of participation that you're getting from private companies or private institutions towards working with you.
I think perhaps the short answer to that is not enough. You know, we have had some support from, some of our partner countries, support from the UK, from Canada, and from the European Union. And also we've had some projects that we've done with some organizations as well. But the reality is that for the scale of work that is required, we need a lot more participation from not only the multilaterals, our donor partners, but also from philanthropies and other organizations as well. So we need the whole bag and gamut of organizations, funding agencies, and so on to be part of that process, part of that vision to build that level of resilience. because ultimately we want a success story. We're in the Caribbean, we're subject to hurricanes every year, so for six months of the year, we live in threat of extreme weather events. And so we have to build that level of resilience. And if Dominica can achieve what it has set out to achieve, and if we can share that experience with others as well, so that we lessen our vulnerability to those events, then I think we would have gone a long way towards securing and reducing our vulnerabilities and building that level of resilience that we need to.
Thanks. Maybe just to add to some of those comments, one of the pieces of the puzzle that's still missing in terms of like attracting the private sector, I think, is that you know, a lot of the funding for implementing the resilience plan is public finance, whereas international finance, climate finance, development finance, but it's not going into the hands of individuals and households to make those choices. And so I think what we don't see enough of in Dominica and other small islands is support or subsidies for households to be able to kind of make the purchases that would then you know, attract private sector to come in and provide solutions for more resilient housing, more energy efficient housing and communities and so on. So I think that for me is a kind of a piece of the puzzle that's still missing, and I like to see more kind of creative financing solutions that help you know, put money into the hands of those who can make those choices and therefore sort of attract more private sector initiatives. But hopefully there's more of that to come.
I just wanted to close out by building on what Francine said. The name of the film is Climate Blueprint intentionally. We do think that there's a lot of really innovative ideas coming out here of Dominica in a holistic plan that, if invested in, can be a blueprint for other places looking to do similar work. So that is the vision for this story. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you all for coming out, and enjoy the rest of your time at COP.